G'day, welcome to another Toxic Revisited. Richard Flanagan touched very briefly upon this topic in his book, and I didn't actually consider covering it at the time in series 1 of these videos. But we're here at a skate park, the natural habitat of skates, and there don't seem to be any skates left. But no, we're not talking about those skates. We're in fact talking about the Maugean Skate, which has recently hit the news in rather a dramatic fashion. So whilst there's no skates here in this habitat, let's check out the skate in its actual habitat. So now that we've seen the skate in its natural environment, let's have a closer look at the geography of the west coast of Tasmania. So now that we've seen the skate in its natural habitat, let's have a look at where that habitat's located. This is Macquarie Harbour on Tasmania's west coast. As you can see, it's got quite a small entrance at the beginning. And if you're not familiar with Macquarie Harbour, you might be familiar with this harbour. This is Sydney Harbour, taken from exactly the same distance to scale as the Macquarie Harbour. Because whereas Sydney Harbour's got an area of 55 square kilometres, Macquarie Harbour has an area of 315 square kilometres, almost 6 times bigger. So let's look at the salmon farming operations within the harbour. And those red rectangles are the salmon farming zones allocated under the Marine Farm Plan for Macquarie Harbour. It looks quite big, doesn't it? It looks like it takes up a hell of a lot of space in the harbour. But again, now let's take a closer look. Because this Google Earth shot is exactly the same scale. And can you see any salmon farms? I can't. Not from that distance away. So we'll now zoom in, and we'll zoom all the way in until we can actually see the salmon farms. Got to go quite a long way in, don't we, actually, to see the actual impact, until we can see now it is in the water. So when comparing the marine farming zones to the actual operations, it's quite different, because the zone shows where a lease can be located, but a lease is actually quite a small amount of space within that zone. And now let's backtrack and have a look at the habitat of the skate. So the skate in Macquarie Harbour had verified habitat in the Maroon area, and verified habitat that is since 2021, and the yellow is verified habitat before 2021 but not seen since, and the green is unverified. So really the only sort of area we're looking about is the area towards the top right, left of the thing around Liberty Bay and Table Head. And so let's have a look at the salmon farming operations. They're close, but they don't overlap. In May of this year, IMAS released an interim report written by Dr. David Moreno and Professor Jason Simmons. So the Moreno report was released on the 2nd of May, and it was an interim report into the Macquarie Harbour Maugean Skate population status and monitoring. And to be frank, it had some pretty scary findings. Because the number one finding was that between 2014 and 2021, there's been a 47% decline in the numbers of Maugean skate in the harbour. And the conclusion was that our results highlight the vulnerability of the species to degraded environmental conditions and the need for further monitoring of the population. They did find that the numbers of skate in the Table Head area was a significantly higher proportion than in any other area in Macquarie Harbour, and reminded that the Table Head area is the area to the top in Maroon, and these are the salmon farms in that vicinity. They're not particularly close. So whereas the decline was 47% across the whole harbour, the decline in the Table Head area was only 44%. Still pretty bloody scary, but it was interesting that it declined less in the areas where the salmon farms were located than it did across the entire harbour where the salmon farms weren't. Shortly after the release of the Moreno report, a focus group was established, the role of which was to investigate options for preserving the Maugean skate. And no sooner had a focus group been established that the environmental groups complained that they'd been excluded from it. Well, not surprisingly, because all they want to do is shut things down. They've got nothing constructive to add, unlike the salmon industry, which added $750 million to be invested in the skate saving program. But barely had the focus group formed when the Commonwealth Government released, under the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, a conservation advice for the Maugean Skate. Now let's just say that the advice was greeted with some shock and surprise by numerous stakeholders. And so this was the conservation advice issued by the Australian Government. And the first urgent priority before summer 2023, so that's only 2 months or 3 months away, so the fastest way to achieve this is to significantly reduce fish biomass and feeding rates. So essentially they want to shut down salmon farming in Macquarie Harbour. That's 11% of the entire production of the salmon industry, and $110 million a year gone. So let's find out what it actually says. Firstly, it starts talking about the habitat, then it says that Maugean Skate prefers shallow channels between 5 and 15 metres in depth. The salmon farms are out in 30 metres. Waters in their preferred depth range have relatively stable temperatures and naturally low DO concentrations, 30 to 80%. 30% is actually really, really low. And there were 2 major mortality events in 2019. The first being in summer, when the hot water temperatures reduced the oxygen even further, causing the Maugean Skates to actually basically die 2 to 4 weeks after that event. And the second one was one of those westerly storm events where the ocean water comes in over the lip of Hell's Gates, rushes down to the bottom of the harbour and disturbs the really anoxic bottom layers of the water, forcing it up into the shallower region and suffocating the skate. And it's the same thing that wiped out one of the Bajuna fish farms a number of years back. These are natural events. But let's unpack that conservation advice, because to this layman at least, there seemed to be quite a few issues with it that didn't actually add up. Some things that looked like misinterpretations of science, or maybe just incompetence. So the conservation advice starts by looking at the threats to the skate. It says the primary threat to the Maugean Skate is habitat degradation and sustained reduction of dissolved oxygen. And it talks about river flows into the harbour contributing 45% of total nitrogen, and salmon farming operations and sewage 25%. However, it says that only 30% of the nitrogen from the rivers is labile, which means that it uses oxygen to break down, while salmon waste is 100% labile. So it's implying that salmon waste is twice the amount of river waste. Is that the case? Because the report that it uses is this one funded by the FRDC, Macquarie Harbour Oxygen Process, written by Karen Wild-Allen et al. And this report concludes the largest input of nitrogen to the harbour was from rivers, 45%, fish farms and sewage, 25%, and only 30% of the nitrogen load from the river was labile. So yeah, okay, it does. The research that they've done confirms that. But let's go back to this one now. It says that the 2 main rivers contribute around 90 million to 180 million kilos of organic matter to the harbour a year. However, only 30% of that organic matter is labile. And it says that organic matter entering the estuarine systems is oxidised by microbial communities, etc. But let's go back to Wild-Allen. She says only 30% of the nitrogen was labile. So there's a bit of a confusion there between the nitrogen input and the organic carbon input, because it says here that the nitrogen is labile, and then but they've talked straight about organic carbon inputs. And It says here only 30% of the organic carbon is labile. Well, it doesn't say that at all. Wild Allen did not say the carbon was not labile. And the other report that they examine is one written by Maxey and al. Dissolved oxygen consumption. Now, let's examine what these guys actually say. They say they designed a study to examine the patterns of pelagic oxygen demand in a fjord-like estuary. Now, pelagic oxygen demand is oxygen demand within the water column, so we're not talking about benthic or at the bottom. And they found that proximity to fish farms was an important but localised explanatory variable for pelagic oxygen demand, but not a significant driver of POD compared to the Gordon River. They say that maintaining 12,000 tonnes of salmon in the harbour equates to organic matter releases of 2 million to 2.5 million kilos per year. But the King and Gordon River introduce between 90 million and 180 million kilos of organic matter into the harbour each year. This is more than 40 times larger than the volume released by the farms, but the con advice seems to suggest that that's negligible. And in their review, they found that the effects of aquaculture activities on DO dynamics found no direct evidence linking an increase in pelagic oxygen demand to fish farming, and it says that they can show that their study can show some localised effects of proximity to the farms. However, it's difficult to say the farms are a significant driver of pelagic oxygen demand. In theory, farm-derived organic matter will introduce an oxygen demand to the water column, but due to the overwhelming amount of organic matter introduced from the Gordon River, farm-derived pelagic oxygen demand is difficult to detect. And that's been shown by IMAS. So IMAS has released a number of media releases saying that the oxygen levels have been improving, but it has been historically lower. And another one in 2020, also then saying how it has improved, but we need to be very careful of the pivotal role that the weather, wind, river flow plays in influencing the extent of dissolved oxygen decline, not just salmon farms, as the conservation advice seems to imply. So let's go back to their threats again. Let's go through them. Okay, so these are the threats. Firstly, they said that Wild Allen did a study of anthropogenic organic carbon. No, they didn't. It was oxygen and nitrogen. They looked at these two major mortality events that are not even caused by or even correlated by salmon farming, so why do they list them under the supposed threat from aquaculture? And they examine how the EPA issued a total permissible dissolved nitrogen output for the harbour, and that the extent that this will regulate the improved dissolved oxygen, and as it's only one component of the total organic carbon. How can nitrogen be a component of an organic carbon load? Has this person never even done chemistry at high school? It's beyond belief. It's just really, really frustrating. And we'll look a little bit further about the threats here. They actually say the presence of seals and sea lice has increased in Macquarie Harbour with the expansion of salmon aquaculture. I mean, really. The only bit of research I could find about the effect of sea lice on the Maugean Skate was from some research published by the Department of Primary Industries, where it says Maugean skate caught in nets are subject to lice attack and subject mortality. That's the only reference I could find. No scientific paper references that. And let's have a look at what type of lice that they may be talking about. Because if they're talking about the salmon lice, then I think that they might be just a little bit confused. Because here is the salmon louse, and its distribution is the northern hemisphere. It is not found in Tasmania, it's not affecting Tasmanian salmon farms, and it's certainly not spreading from Tasmanian salmon farms and impacting upon the Maugean skate. And that shows the level of ignorance that whoever wrote this conservation advice knows about aquaculture operations and salmon farming in Tasmania. Now, it's not surprising that Luke Martin said
there's some elements around the report that were released yesterday that, fair to say, blindsided us to some degree, and one of it is the definitive nature of what they said around the contributing factor around the salmon.
And just like there's no skates left in this skate park, the Maugean Skate used to exist in another harbour on Tasmania's west coast. So the conservation report says that the Maugean Skate has only been recorded in 2 isolated estuaries in southwestern Tasmania, Macquarie Harbour and to a lesser extent Bathurst Harbour. The species occurs within the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area across all of Bathurst Harbour. Within Bathurst Harbour and Bathurst Channel, the species occurs within the Port Davey and Bathurst Harbour Marine Nature Reserve and the tenure of the Southwest National Park. And for those people not aware of where Bathurst Harbour is, it's right down here in the southwest wilderness. It is absolutely miles away from any human intervention. And if we zoom in, we'll see exactly how much of a pristine area it is. But according to the report, DNA suggests that the species no longer occurs in Bathurst Harbour. Why? And whilst we can't ignore climate change, which yes, tin hat wearers, is caused by human activity, the fact that the skate died out in Bathurst Harbour, where there's no human activity, is something that we really need to consider. Because in trying to save the skate at Macquarie Harbour, are we as much interfering in what could be a natural process as we are allegedly causing its demise locally or globally? So you've got to ask yourself, is this conservation advice just incompetent, or does the federal department actually have some sort of agenda? I've always said that whenever you think of a conspiracy theory, first you need to eliminate incompetence. But unfortunately, incompetent or by design, this advice is going to be jumped upon by anti-salmon farming activists in their campaign to shut down salmon farms, and not for any real concern about the Maugean Skate. Because if the activists get their way, nobody will win. Not the salmon industry, not the environment, not the people who work in the industry or depend upon it on the west coast. And lastly, and absolutely with most to lose, the skate. And while people will come to the simplistic conclusion that the only solution is to ban salmon farming, not even Dr. David Moreno thinks that.
So one of the most challenging things, aspects of working with the species is that, like I said, none of the problems are simple. So there isn't one magic bullet that you said, oh, if we tackle this thing, we would just solve the situations.
So that concludes this episode of Toxic Revisited, and I hope, like me, that you've had a chance to have a little bit of a further think, and to think that the conservation advice might actually not be that accurate, and might in fact be skating around the truth. Thanks for watching. If you like it, click subscribe, and above all, as always, please share. See you next time. Well, this is the 4th skate park I've been to where there's been no skates present, and no skaters either. And maybe the federal department should have a conservation advice about saving the skate park. And why are there no skates in this skate park in the Whitsundays?